And that is really the way in for President Trump to take control of tax policy through his tariff policy, because usually taxation is a power that's reserved to Congress,
Right.
except in the situation of national emergencies. And he's used this national emergency justification and national security justification to put tariffs on almost everything we do.
And let's be fair, he's not the first president to do this. So he's just doing it in a bigger way, right? Biden kept the tariffs that Trump first imposed his first term. He kept the tariffs on China. Other presidents have certainly imposed tariffs before, and rarely does Congress interrupt tariffs. So tariffs, would it be fair to say, though, that tariffs are a brake? They put the brakes on the economy. They put the brakes on consumption. I mean, that's not a question, is it?
Not at all. And it's not just consumption. We have to think of it from the production side too. There are so many processes in the American economy that rely to some extent on inputs that come from abroad. Whether it's labor, which we can contract at lower rates elsewhere, or other sorts of factors like natural resources that we just don't have in the United States. So it bites on both ends. It costs more to buy the things that we buy from the rest of the world. It costs more for us to make things that, where the processes are organized in the United States, but where we also depend on the rest of the world for inputs.
Yeah. So now, one of Trump's suggestion is that what he wants to do is bring manufacturing back to the U.S., and the tariffs is a way to do that because it makes foreign goods more expensive. And, let's face it. I mean, there are countries that impose huge tariffs on us that we don't impose tariffs back. I mean, that's a true statement. There are countries that have value-added taxes, which I know most economists think they're fine. I disagree with that, just because while yes, it applies to their people, to their country, as well as it applies to international, it is in fact a tax that when we don't have one, it's a one-way tax. So if we export to them, there's a tax. If they export to us, there's not, because we don't have a value-added tax. So, but so there is that. So we're putting those brakes on the economy. And I'm going back to Ronald Reagan days, because I was around in Ronald Reagan days, I know a little before your time, but I was around then. And what Reagan did, remember, is that he had this high interest rates and he had stagflation. He inherited an economy that was really slow. And so what he did is we had the high interest rates, which put brakes on. And then he had a massive tax bill in 1981 that put the accelerator on. Do you see that happening here? Even though I know most economists aren't a fan of tariffs, but do you see that mechanism between the braking of adding tariffs and the acceleration of reducing income taxes?
Well, I'd agree with you that the tariffs are putting on the brakes. It's killing confidence across the board, from senior management to investors to consumers. Like, confidence readings that we see from surveys are lower than they've been in decades. Whether income taxes are pushing on the accelerator right now the way that they would have in Reagan's day is different. I think it's harder to say that the tax situation that we're starting from now is as stifling as the one that we had in the early years of the Reagan administration. If you want to think of a Laffer curve kind of argument, I don't think we're as close to the peak or the declining side of that curve now as we might have been during Reagan's time. So, the ability of tax policy to further stimulate the economy is not as obvious. And I think you'd have to consider the way the distribution of tax benefits in the new bill comes out. They're really not as broadly based as the Reagan tax cuts were. And the idea that they're going to really stimulate economic activity across the board is difficult to sustain.
Well, surely if the 2017 Act were allowed to expire, it would add additional brakes. I don't think there's any question there. People would have less money. If they have less money, they spend less money. So, and people tend to spend everything they get, and except unless you're talking about the top 10%, but everybody else spends everything they get. So that would certainly put the brake. So I actually think the extension of the 2017 Act is probably the best part of this bill. And there are some things in there that are very heavy investment. One thing I want to talk to you about, Matt, is there are parts of this bill, this big, beautiful bill, it's actually titled that, interestingly enough, but there's parts of it that are very investment driven. So there's deduction, bonus depreciation, there's expensing of research and development costs. There's tax reduction actually for small business owners. So there are things that are very investment driven in that bill. And then there are these other things like not taxing tips, not taxing overtime, deductions for automobile interest, things like this that seem to be very consumption driven. I'd like your take on those things that are investment driven and from a policy standpoint, and in fact, potentially offsetting the tariffs versus those aspects that are consumption driven.
Right. Yeah, the investment focused features are, very continuous with the 2017 bill, the accelerated depreciation, like you mentioned. There's debate over whether these depreciation allowances favor investments of a longer term or a shorter term. Making it an expense just kind of removes investment from the calculus of taxation altogether. It's just the government giving up that revenue. This should stimulate investment. The research on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017 doesn't show a major uptick in investment. The overall impact of the depreciation allowances and other benefits of that bill on the supply side were mostly given away in distributions to shareholders rather than increasing capital expenditure within business. So continuing that, yes, I mean, directionally it does favor investment, but the bang for the buck of those measures is considerably muted. And on the consumption side, like you said, I mean, expanding the standard deduction in the 2017 Act really was what lowered the tax burden for most people. And where that's going to come back, we're going to extend that, which is positive.
She's making it permanent.
Yeah.
This bill makes it permanent.
But what changes the situation for people in low to moderate tax brackets is that they're going to lose a lot of government transfers. And so, whether it's worse than having their rates snap back to where it was without the larger standard deduction, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a technical thing that'll have to be hammered out as the bill comes. But, like I said, overall, the incremental amount of stimulus from this is not likely to be as profound as it was in 2017.
So, but let me ask you just in concept, okay? If you give a tax benefit that is meaning that you have more money to those in what I'm going to call the spending population, because the reality is top 1%, there's only so much money you can spend in a year. I mean, they don't, if they get a tax break, that's not going to increase their spending. That will more likely actually increase their investment than their spending, because again, you can only spend so much money. Most people can only spend a limited amount of money every year. Nobody spends $20 million a year. Okay. So let's take these two specific that I think are very consumption oriented, the no tax on tips and the no tax on overtime. How does that impact? Is that a short term, long term? Let's assume they're permanent, which they're not. They're 5 years, but even if they were long term, have a long term impact, or is it just like feeding a child a candy bar?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a game you play with the employers when you change the rules. So if there's less tax on tips, less tax on overtime, those things are cheaper for the employer. So does it make sense to hire 20 people, or does it make sense to hire 15 people and have them work a lot of overtime? Those are the kinds of decisions that will be reconsidered in light of this. And likewise for tipped workers, there's this sub-minimum wage where what you're required to pay workers is reduced if you can show that they're made up with it by tips. If we have more workers that are swept into that category, they're losing what used to be guaranteed earnings, and now they're put at risk as tips.